Thanks for watching. This is part 2 of the Getting Your Poetry Published video, which you may have seen the first part in which I explored different methods of publishing your work. And in this video, I want to look at the literary magazine scene and how to get your poetry published. So the first thing to say is, of course, most poets will start out by publishing individual poems in literary magazines and journals. So how do you do that? Well, the very first thing to do, and I've explored this in a previous video by the way, is to know those magazines and journals, subscribe to those magazines and journals, or buy some back issues of the magazines or journals, or go to your local library. And this is where I discussed the literary magazine scene in the video I posted recently with a visit to the Los Angeles Public Library, which has a very good selection of literary magazines and journals that you can get your hands on, and probably that's the case for most central libraries here in the United States and also in the UK. So that's always a good port of call to build your knowledge of those literary magazines. Look at the aesthetics of the magazines and think about your poetry in the context of those magazines. The first thing to say about that is that there is no point in sending your haiku to a literary magazine that specializes in long-form poetry. There's no point in sending your love poems to the literary magazine that specializes in political poetry. So make sure you know the market. It is really the first and most crucial stage of getting your poetry published. Now, you've decided that let's just assume that you have completed that stage. You are familiar with several literary magazines that you want to approach and ask to publish your poems. You need to find out about the submission guidelines. They are absolutely crucial. You will find them on the website of those literary magazines, and many of those literary journals will direct you towards a website called Submittable. Submittable is the platform through which most literary magazines receive submissions. So you basically upload your poems to that website, and then the literary magazine has access from the back end to gather those submissions and then to read them and then to send you maybe an acceptance, but probably, let's be fair, a rejection, because poets are dealing with rejection every day of the week. There is just such a huge volume of submissions being made to literary journals and magazines. And just consider this: if you're a poet just starting out, your work is going up against poets who may have published 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 collections of poetry. They may be celebrated poets. They may be award-winning poets. So just bear that in mind. It is incredibly difficult to get published in any field, in any genre, but to do so in poetry, I believe, is the most difficult. So you have to get the submission absolutely right. And the first thing you need to do after knowing about the magazine you're submitting to is to know about the submission guidelines and to absolutely follow those guidelines. If the literary magazine is asking you to send 3 to 5 poems, do not send 6 poems. Do not send 2 poems. Send 3, 4, or 5 poems. I would suggest, in fact, that you send 5, because if you're sending 3, then you have 3 chances of your work being published. But if you send 5 poems, you have 5 chances of your poems being published. So, next, let's talk a bit more about the submission guidelines. So it's not just about the number of poems you send. There will be guidelines about how to present your poems on the page, and that's just by using a standard font like Times Roman, 12 point, not centering your poems. Make sure your poems are left aligned and they are single spaced. Next, you want to think about your cover letter, because as well as attaching your poems, you will need to write a brief cover letter. And I'll just give you an example of what I do with the cover letter. Is that I will find out the name, or I will already know the name of the poetry editor at a given literary magazine, and I will address them directly and the poetry editorial team at whatever the name of that magazine is. Let's call it the Lyric Lab Poetry Magazine. Wait, now there's an idea. Okay, we'll come back to that another time. But yes, you need to write a cover letter and you need to address it to the poetry editor by name, making sure that you spell their name correctly, of course, and to the poetry editorial team at the name of that magazine. You then want to keep your letter, your cover letter, short and sweet. You want to let them know that you are familiar with the magazine. If you read something recently that you enjoyed, mention that. If you think your poetry is a particularly good fit for that magazine, say why, and then kind of get in and get out, you know, in a short and concise way. I think it's also important to include a brief third-person biography outlining who you are. You may have no experience in publishing poetry whatsoever, in which case you could refer to yourself as, in the third person, as an emerging poet. And you could maybe tell them what you do besides poetry. Keep it short and sweet and professional sounding. And I think that's about it. If I think of anything else, I will add it, but let's just go over that again. You're going to address the poetry editor and the poetry editorial team at that magazine. You're going to make sure you follow the guidelines where they ask for a specific number of poems. I also mention in parentheses, so I might say, for example, dear so-and-so, thank you for taking the time to consider this poetry submission, or thank you for considering the attached poems, and then in parentheses I will put the name of those poems and then say a little about the magazine, why you are sending it their way and why you think your poetry might be a good fit, and then also to tell them you've included a brief biography and sincerely your name followed by your brief third-person biography. And that's pretty much standard, but it is also personal because you're talking about why you're sending it to them, why you think it might be a good fit for their magazine, and then upload your submission. Usually it is in a Word document or a PDF, and then send it their way. One other thing I would say is that sometimes literary magazines ask for you to anonymize your subject, so do not put your name in the file name of your PDF or Word doc, and make sure that your name does not therefore appear in the file itself. So when you click into the file and you see the poem, make sure that your name does not appear. I usually do include my name in the top right-hand corner of the header, but if the literary magazine has specifically asked not to have that included, then obviously I'm going to follow the guidelines. Now, one thing I want to do in this video is to look at my website, and with the click of a button, you are going to be able to see what I can see right now. So here I am on my personal, this is my website, martinjago.net, and if I navigate to the blogs and news page, and I'm just going to scroll down here, here's a review at the top by Christopher Viner of my collection PhotoFit, and I'm going to scroll down past that. Here on the blog I talk about some of my poetry successes or reviews I might have written. Here's a broadside. I was actually talking about a broadside earlier in the part 1 video. So there's a good example of a broadside. And let's keep going, because where are we? Oh, here is an article. And this article is taken from a poetry workshop I facilitated at the public library in downtown Los Angeles. And I presented a lecture on getting your poetry in print. Here is the article from April last year, so please do check that out, because it also includes some other things that I've not spoken about. Actually, it's a good reminder. You also want to pay attention to your rejection letters. Now, I had this kind of ongoing joke with a friend who is also a writer about the quality of our rejection letters, because rejection is such a part of the artist's experience, but specifically in writing for writers. It's actually important to talk about those rejections, because sometimes they are just standard form rejections, and it just comes across that okay, they read it, they didn't want it, thank you very much. But other times you will get a certain type of rejection. Maybe it's got a personal touch to it, that it talks specifically about the poems that you've submitted, and it may say something like that the poetry was really good and they really liked it. It's just that it's incredibly competitive and it just didn't quite make it into this particular issue of the magazine, but maybe it's encouraging you to send further work at a later time. And it's important to make sure you make a note of that. So when you submit to that magazine again, you can reference that in your cover letter. The other thing about this article I just want to draw your attention to, there's a list of do's and don'ts and also tips, hacks and shortcuts. So, but also there's just a short list here of literary magazines and journals. There are, of course, far more literary magazines and journals out there that you can approach, but here's just a very brief list to get you started. If you have never submitted a poem to a literary magazine before, or if you have but are looking for new literary magazines to learn about, go online, check out these magazines, see if your poetry might be a good fit, and get submitting your work. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please do click the like button and the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything to do that, but it really helps to grow the channel. You can also support the channel in other ways by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link or clicking on the Patreon link. Thanks very much, and I'll be back soon with more poetry content.